Welcome back to my devlog series for a strange new genre I'm working on. It's been a little bit since the last video, and I'll have to apologize that I don't have anything amazing to show off relative to the time I was away. Suffice it to say, real life had its way with me, and while things still aren't quite normal, I figured I finally had enough progress to justify a new video. Anyway, enough whining, let's talk about what we're all here for. The recoil-operated, shot-shell-compatible auto revolver, the Debugger. For a quick refresher on what kind of Frankenstein's monster this is. So I guess we'll have to design something new and see how many extra features we can slap on it. First, we're going to need something big if we're shooting some shot shells. Let's take the base of the design from the Taurus Judge. But move that barrel down to add more cool, to reduce recoil, of course. Oh, and if it's semi-auto, let's add some Webley Fosbury in there too. Actually, if we're talking about reducing recoil, let's go all the way and toss a Mateba MTR in the mix. Now isn't that just a beautiful mess? I bet this baby is going to have zero recoil. The main thing I wanted to implement with this design was recoil and getting more gun parts to drive interactions automatically rather than mostly by the player. First, let's take a look at how the weapon operates. The user pulls the trigger, cocking and releasing the hammer strikes the round, producing recoil, which then drives the cylinder backwards, simultaneously cocking the hammer, while a tooth on the frame engages the channeling on the cylinder, rotating it to the next round. Finally, a spring behind the magazine plate restores the cylinder's position. It's probably hard to tell in the recording, but the trigger pull is much lighter when the hammer is already cocked after the first trigger pull. Next, I made some improvements in how I'm handling inter-component collision detection. This probably took the most time to get working decently enough, and allowed me to do two new things. Now, you can have an ejector push all the rounds at once, and components can transfer movement through each other. In this case, the magazine plate pushes against the rounds, but since they can't move, they will transfer that movement to the cylinder. The biggest new features this weapon helped me develop were spring components, so the magazine can push the cylinder back into place, link components, so the cylinder's linear movement against the hammer can be easily translated to rotational movement for the hammer. And of course, multi-projectile rounds for the shotgun shells. Let's quickly run through some bugs I fixed as well. Glitchy physics when walking over cartridges, aiming things that aren't guns, cursor resetting each time an object is picked up, double action revolver not firing without being manually cocked first, extra trigger pulls when switching operation modes. Special thanks to the test team in the Discord. Actually, while I was in the middle of doing all this, I stumbled across a new beta feature that might just make this project a lot easier, or harder. In UE 5.3, they introduced physics constraint components, which looks like it can do some really cool stuff. I haven't experimented with it yet since I'm still in 5.2 and 5.4 is supposed to be around the corner. So when 5.4 comes out, I think I'm going to try upgrading my project, and if it doesn't blow up in my face too badly, I'll start messing around to see if it might be easier with this plugin. The biggest issue with this is that beta features can always end up being scrapped, and then I'd kind of be back to square one unless I commit to maintaining that code myself. But if everything works out, this should allow generic physics to affect the gun parts as well. As for what's next, there are still quite a few finicky parts about the recoil operation that I'll be ironing out before moving on to the next steps. But before that, one question I imagine some of you might have is, why not just set the state of the gun after it was fired like a normal person? Well, Mr. Strawman viewer, there's a two-part answer to that question. One, the purpose of the game is to design the weapons yourself, so if I just hardcode everything, then we won't be able to have fun tuning our recoil springs after our guns jam due to failure to cycle. 2. I want to use whatever recoil forces are left over after being applied to the gun parts and dynamically generate recoil animations for the player, giving us even more parameters to tune that directly affect gameplay feel. 3. I'm not so sure I can call myself a normal person. Anyway, once I get the debugger cleaned up, I think it's time to move on to something a bit bigger than a handgun. Maybe a shotgun or rifle next. Maybe something gas-operated, or tube-fed, or magazine-fed, or bolt action, or lever action, or belt-fed, or screw action, or breech loading, or pump action. And while we're talking about future stuff, I'd like to open up discussion about how people think two-handed weapons might best work with this crazy input system. I think it feels more immersive to have to hold down the offhand mouse button for something two-handed, but I guess it would be easier if it was just automatic when you switch to aim mode. I also like the idea of holding a button because it reminds you that you're supposed to be actively holding and supporting a weapon with your other hand, so it should be more unwieldy than something you can use with a single hand. And again, do I add a specific two-handed grab mode? Like press F to toggle two-handed grab mode? That way you can be aiming and holding with the offhand, then also go quickly into manipulation mode to operate whatever the offhand is already holding? Or forget all that noise and make clicks with the offhand perform a single specific action you picked at design time. As always, I lean to the more immersive side and just assume it will be easier to simplify later if playtesting doesn't work out, rather than trying to add more complexity later if it's too boring. Let me know what you think sounds better down below or in the Discord, and I hope to see you again in the next video.